Imagine a creature that never really existed, yet for more than a century it stood proudly in museums, filled the pages of textbooks, and even became a symbol of dinosaurs themselves. Imagine scientists digging up ancient bones, rushing to reconstruct them, and in their haste creating a monster that was more myth than reality. Before we reveal the story of how one of the most famous dinosaurs of all time was accidentally invented, make sure to subscribe, so you don't miss more tales of prehistoric mistakes, forgotten creatures, and the strange afterlife of animals long extinct. Because this story is not just about bones, it's about ambition, rivalry, and the birth of a legend. The dinosaur in question is Brontosaurus, the thunder lizard. To generations of children, it was the gentle giant of the prehistoric world, a long-necked, swamp-dwelling titan that rumbled across the earth. The name itself carries power: Brontosaurus, the lizard that could shake the ground with its steps. But here's the truth: for decades, Brontosaurus was nothing more than a scientific accident, a creature pieced together from bones that didn't belong to it. It was, in many ways, a dinosaur invented by human error. The story begins in the late 19th century, during one of the most chaotic and bitter chapters in the history of science, the Bone Wars. To paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinkercope were locked in a ruthless rivalry. Their goal was simple: discover more dinosaurs than the other. Their methods, however, were anything but noble. They bribed fossil hunters, sabotaged digs, and published rushed descriptions in their desperate race to outdo one another. It was in this feverish atmosphere that Brontosaurus was born. In 1879, Marsh uncovered an enormous skeleton in the American West. It was nearly complete, with massive limbs and a long tail. But the skull was missing. Marsh wanted to make a splash, to announce to the world that he had found a new, incredible dinosaur. And so he reconstructed it. To fill in the missing parts, he borrowed bones from other discoveries, attaching the wrong skull and piecing together fragments that didn't belong. What emerged was a dinosaur unlike any other: massive, long-necked, with a strange skull that gave it an entirely different appearance. Marsh christened it Brontosaurus excelsus, the noble thunder lizard. The public was enthralled. Newspapers printed illustrations, museums built life-size displays, and Brontosaurus quickly became one of the most famous dinosaurs in the world. But the problem was obvious to other scientists. They noticed the skull didn't match the body. They pointed out similarities to another dinosaur Marsh himself had discovered, called Apatosaurus. Slowly, evidence mounted that Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus were the same creature, and that Marsh's thunder lizard was nothing more than a duplicate, a chimera born from misassembled bones. By the early 20th century, paleontologists had declared Brontosaurus invalid. Officially, it did not exist. And yet, Brontosaurus refused to die. Museums, reluctant to rename one of their most popular exhibits, kept using the name. Textbooks continued to print it. The image of Brontosaurus, the gentle giant of swamps, lingered in culture, more powerful than the truth itself. Children learned to spell the name before they learned. Apatosaurus, even Hollywood preferred it. Brontosaurus sounded dramatic, cinematic, and unforgettable. The world loved Brontosaurus too much to let it vanish, even if it never truly existed. The irony is that the mistakes didn't end with the name. Early reconstructions showed Brontosaurus and other sauropods like it as sluggish swamp dwellers, dragging their tails through mud, too heavy to stand on land. Scientists believed their bodies would collapse under their own weight if they left the water. For decades, these creatures were imagined as half-drowned giants, spending their lives wading through marshes. But later evidence revealed this image was entirely wrong. Brontosaurus and its relatives were perfectly capable of living on land. Their legs were strong pillars, their tails powerful counterbalances. They were dynamic, thriving animals, not lumbering failures trapped in swamps. And so the myth of Brontosaurus grew even more tangled. Not only was it an invented name, it was also imagined as a creature it never was. A thunder lizard, yes, but a thunder lizard trapped in water, a prisoner of its own weight. It was a fiction layered on top of another fiction, until the truth of the animal itself was buried under decades of mistakes. Yet, even in being wrong, Brontosaurus shaped the way the world saw dinosaurs. It captured imaginations, inspired artists, and became a cultural icon. It taught children that giants once walked the earth, and it gave paleontology a mascot that no amount of correction could erase. Sometimes, a mistake can become larger than the truth, and Brontosaurus, the dinosaur that was never real, became perhaps the most real dinosaur of them all in the minds of people. But the story doesn't end there, because in a twist that sounds almost too strange to be true, Brontosaurus would eventually rise again. After more than a century of being declared a mistake, scientists returned to the fossils with new methods, new analyses, and new eyes. And what they found changed everything, reopening the debate that had seemed settled for generations. Apatosaurus, the name means deceptive lizard, and that's exactly what happened. For more than 100 years, Brontosaurus lived in limbo, officially gone, yet alive in the public imagination. It was a ghost, a name repeated by millions, a dinosaur that scientists insisted did not exist. And then in 2015, a group of paleontologists published a massive study that shook the field. They compared hundreds of bones from Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus specimens using modern statistical methods to analyze even the smallest differences, and the results were astonishing. The study suggested that Brontosaurus really was distinct from Apatosaurus after all. The differences in their neck bones, their body proportions, and their skeletons were enough to justify separating them into two different genres. After more than a century of being considered a mistake, Brontosaurus was back. The dinosaur scientists had accidentally invented had in a way come true. It was no longer just a ghost of the bone wars. It was real. The announcement made headlines worldwide. Museums revisited their exhibits. Scientists debated the findings, and the public embraced the return of the thunder lizard. Children who had grown up loving Brontosaurus were vindicated. Suddenly their favorite dinosaur was not a myth, but a living chapter in science. It was as if the past had rewritten itself and the legend had stepped out of imagination into reality. But even now the story remains complicated. Not all scientists agree. Some argue that the differences between Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus are too small to justify separate names, that it is still safer to treat them as one. Others insist the evidence is strong enough. The debate continues, reminding us that science is never finished. It is not a list of facts carved in stone. It is a process of conversation and sometimes a tug of war between tradition, evidence, and imagination. What makes the Brontosaurus story so powerful is not just the bones. It is what it reveals about us. It shows how human ambition, rivalry, and error can create legends. It shows how names can take on lives of their own, becoming symbols bigger than the truth. And it shows how science, though flawed, is capable of correcting itself, of revisiting old mistakes, and finding new meaning. Brontosaurus is more than a dinosaur. It is a story about the nature of discovery itself. The thunder lizard teaches us that being wrong is not the end, it is the beginning of curiosity. That the mistakes of the past are not failures, but stepping stones, and that sometimes the creatures we invent tell us as much about ourselves as they do about the prehistoric world. The tale begins in the heart of the American West, specifically the Green River Formation in Wyoming. This fossil-rich site had already yielded some remarkable discoveries when, in the late 1800s, prospectors began unearthing bones so large and strange they hinted at something extraordinary. The bones included partial skeletons of sauropods, the longest-necked dinosaurs. Among them was a series of remarkably preserved neck vertebrae. Whoever examined them saw not just a dinosaur's neck, but a spectacle. They saw the backbone of a giant, a creature so enormous it could have dwarfed anything alive today. The first specimen found was unearthed by a team led by the renowned paleontologist Edward Drinker Cope. A member of Cope's crew, the amateur fossil hunter named Charles M. Sternberg, was eager to impress his boss. He wanted to find something big, something spectacular. So when he came across the vertebrae, he knew he had struck gold. He carefully cleaned and removed rock from the fossils, revealing their full extent. When Cope saw what Sternberg had found, he was awestruck. These weren't just any dinosaur bones. They were the bones of a giant unlike any he had ever seen before. And so in 1879, Cope named this magnificent creature Titanosaurus. But it wasn't long before his rival, Othniel Charles Marsh got wind of the discovery, and that's when the trouble started. You see, Cope and Marsh were engaged in a fierce professional rivalry known as the Bone Wars. Their feud was so intense that they hired fossil hunters to dig day and night, sometimes resorting to sabotage and deception. In fact, Marsh would later claim that Cope had stolen his dinosaur, Hadrosaurus falci, and renamed it Titanosaurus. So, in a swift move to outshine his rival, Marsh decided to claim the Titanosaurus vertebrae for himself. He had the specimen shipped to Yale University, where he began his own investigation. After examining the fossils, Marsh concluded that they belonged to a previously unknown species. He gave it the name Brontosaurus excelsus, which means thunder lizard. And with that, Brontosaurus entered the world. Now, to be clear, the name Brontosaurus isn't entirely Marsh's creation. He used the genus name Brontosaurus, but the species was called Mark Michelli in honor of the paleontologist who discovered it. But regardless, it was Marsh who solidified Brontosaurus in scientific literature. And that is where things get tricky, because there is a theory that what Marsh and Cope were actually looking at were parts of the same animal. What's crazy is that neither scientist even saw the entire skeleton. Each worked with just a few vertebrae, convinced they had discovered completely different creatures. So, why did they miss the connection? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, the fossils were found at different times and in different places, making it hard to link them together. Second, paleontology wasn't as advanced then. Scientists didn't have the tools or knowledge to put together a complete picture. They couldn't imagine a dinosaur as huge as Brontosaurus. And third, there was a whole lot of rivalry going on. Cope and Marsh were locked in a battle to outdo each other that neither man saw the bigger picture. They were blinded by their own discoveries and the race to publish first. Fast forward a century, and a group of paleontologists set out to solve this mystery. Their work was meticulous. They compared every bone, every measurement, and even the tiniest details of the vertebrae. They used advanced statistical tools to analyze the bones and determine if they came from the same animal. And finally, they reached a groundbreaking conclusion. The bones of Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus were too different to belong to the same species. In 2015, they published their findings, and the world of paleontology shook. Brontosaurus was back. And if you're wondering why there's still some debate, it's because not everyone agrees with the results. Some scientists argue that the differences aren't big enough to split the species, while others stand firm. The debate continues. But that's the thing about science. It's not a static set of facts. It's a conversation. It's a process. Sometimes it's a tug of war, and that is okay because every step brings us closer to the truth. Okay, here's where things get even crazier. The famous Brontosaurus skeleton at the American Museum of Natural History in New York was originally identified as an Apatosaurus. It was a popular exhibit, perfectly reconstructed down to its tiny claws. But when news broke that Brontosaurus might be real, museums took notice. They realized they might have mislabeled the skeleton, and that's when the museum's paleontologist, Mark Mitchell, stepped in. He examined the bones and made a shocking discovery. They were indeed from a Brontosaurus. It was an incredible moment. One of the world's most famous dinosaurs turned out to be something even more extraordinary. And let's not forget the kids. They grew up on Brontosaurus. They drew pictures of it, collected toys, and dreamed of riding it through the Jurassic Park. But when scientists dismissed it as a myth, their dreams got crushed. It was like losing a friend. But now those same kids are adults. They've learned that the world is complex, that nothing is absolute. And when the news broke that Brontosaurus was back, they felt a rush of joy. It was like reuniting with an old friend. They celebrated online, shared stories, and most of all, they hoped their kids would never lose the magic of Brontosaurus. In the end, the Brontosaurus story isn't just about bones. It's about us. It's about our obsession with the past, our desire to understand what came before. It's about the thrill of discovery and the agony of being wrong. It's about the power of imagination and the courage to change our minds. As Carl Sagan said, "We are a way of the universe understanding itself, and the Brontosaurus is part of that story." It's a reminder that we are all storytellers, whether we realize it or not. We weave tales from the fragments of the past, from the bones we find and the knowledge we have. and sometimes those stories become real. The thunder lizard is a testament to the power of human curiosity. It's a reminder that no matter how wrong we might be, we can always find the courage to explore the unknown. So the next time you hear the name Brontosaurus, remember this. It's more than just a dinosaur. It's a story of discovery, imagination, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. It's a story that began in the heart of the American West and echoed around the world. It's a story that reminds us that the past is never truly lost and that the truth is always worth seeking. I hope you enjoyed the story of Brontosaurus, the dinosaur scientists accidentally invented. Remember to stay curious and keep exploring the world around you. Who knows? You might just discover the next great scientific breakthrough. Thanks for watching.